So this is the brand new iPhone 15 Pro Max in natural titanium. I just want to start this video off by saying if you have last year's phone and you're looking at these new devices and you're feeling some FOMO, look, you're not missing a lot, okay? Doesn't matter if you're buying a brand new iPhone or a brand new Samsung phone, the year-over-year updates at this point are very minor, especially when it comes to hardware. In fact, most of the good stuff is based on software, and you're getting a lot of those features on your previous device, so please don't get jealous about it. But look, the first thing I noticed when I picked this phone up was how it felt. It was a very comfortable device. I didn't like the 14 Pro Max the way it felt in the hand. It was heavy, and the edges of the device were very chiseled and sharp, and I found like this was a device I just didn't like using without a case. It actually felt more comfortable with a case on. But these new edges have been brushed. They're rounded off, and they just feel so much comfortable to hold. I know the phone is a little bit lighter this year, 19 grams lighter. That's about 10%, and it makes a difference. It might not seem much when I'm saying it to you personally, but go into a store where there's still a 14 Pro Max on display, pick up the 15 Pro Max, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Especially if you're holding this thing day in, day out, your hands will notice. Plus, on top of that, the width of the phone has been reduced. The bezels are smaller on the 15 Pro Max. I don't know if you guys can see this. It's not a massive difference, but it is there. So you have a phone that's not as wide. It's obviously hard to tell, but when you take those three things and you put them together, you have a phone that just feels so much better to use. Now, you will get fingerprints on the natural titanium. I don't know if you guys can see this right now, but they are there, but they don't show as much as the black version. The black version obviously shows a lot more. It just sticks out, but it is nothing, and I mean nothing compared to the fingerprints you got on the stainless steel model. Now, we all know this year's iPhone got USB Type-C, and that's great. If you are buying the Pro Max, it's gonna be a little bit faster, USB 3, 10 gigabits per second. And I've been playing with it, okay? You can do some pretty cool stuff with it. Like, for example, you can connect an external drive. In fact, your imagination can take you places with this because there's so many different items that you can connect to your phone. And that's kind of surprising. Usually Apple tends to lock their ports down, but they opened it up, which I'm quite surprised, right? Like, this is something Apple usually doesn't do. So the fact that like I can connect an external drive, and then you see it right here, I can go into it and you can see all the games that are currently loaded on it. But I've hooked up a RJ45 dongle to this and wired my phone into my network, which I thought was pretty crazy and something that most people won't do. But you can hook up SD cards, you can hook up USB microphones, the phone will detect it, just all the general USB Type-C stuff that you're used to doing on a computer. Now, because there's USB Type-C, you do have reverse charging, and I've been playing with this. Like, obviously you can reverse charge AirPods, you can reverse charge AirPods with Lightning, assuming the cord is Type-C to Lightning. But if you charge another iPhone rather, whatever phone has the lowest battery, that's the phone that's gonna get charged. You can charge your buddy's Android phone. It's not super fast. We're talking like 4.5 watts. So this is like slower than the wireless charging that the iPhone 15 Pro supports, but at least you can do it now. But the one thing that I was really worried about was this new action button. I thought I wasn't gonna like it. I always preferred the mute switch just because I wear an Apple Watch and I get all my notifications on it. But I'm actually liking this action button a lot. First though, these buttons seem a bit more clicky than the buttons on the 14 Pro Max. I don't know if it's just like because I've been using these buttons for an entire year or they're using stainless steel, but I feel like there's a bit more click on these newer buttons. I also like the vibration feedback that I get from the action button. The vibration motor inside of here feels so good when you press it. Now, you can bind this to whatever you want. Like right now I have it bound to the flashlight. But if you go into the action button settings, Apple gives you a bunch of preset options, but you can get really, really creative with this and actually choose a shortcut and bind it pretty much to anything. Like, I imagine a lot of people are probably gonna bind it to the camera, but if you really want to, you can bind it to specific applications, a timer, a code scanner, whatever you can think up of, you can do it with the action button. But the sound quality on this phone is identical to the previous 14 Pro Max, so there's no difference there. The display quality is also identical. They're still both 6.7-inch displays, 120 Hertz, what Apple calls ProMotion. The brightness is pretty much almost identical. Like, we're talking about 1600 nits of peak HDR brightness. If you go outdoors, that can get bumped up to 2000 or above. And then if you're indoors, they're kind of the same. Like, they usually sit around 800 to 1000 typical brightness if you're looking at these screens inside. The Face ID notch is still the same size as the previous model. The 12 megapixel camera is also identical. I took a couple of videos with both phones. You guys let me know if you actually see a difference. So right now you're staring at the front-facing cameras of the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the iPhone 14 Pro Max. They should be the same. I don't think there's much of a difference, but in case there is, you guys let me know which one looks better, and of course, which one has the better microphone. But what is different is the chip that's inside the iPhone 15 Pro Max. It's using an A17 Pro. This is the first 3nm chip from Apple, and I did a couple of tests, and it obviously is faster than the previous generation. It's quite remarkable because the A16 in last year's model is still much faster than a lot of Android phones that are currently on the market. So it's crazy to see an even faster chip right now. Now, I've played some games on this. Like, I didn't feel like my old phone was slow, but this new phone obviously handles them beautifully. Like, if you're a mobile gamer, you're probably buying an iPhone anyways. But yes, it does heat up like the previous model. There is some throttling if you're playing games for a very long period of time, but I feel like you're still getting the best experience in terms of gaming when you're buying an actual iPhone. But the one thing that hasn't been great so far is the battery life. I know it's early, and I do want to give it more time because I want the battery to calibrate over a month rather than a few days. But I'm only getting 5 hours of screen on time. Now, I have been pretty hard on this phone using the camera app a lot, so that is going to drain the battery faster, especially when you're recording ProRes RAW. But so far, the battery life, 5 hours of screen on time, seems pretty average. I will make another video in a month after the battery calibrates a little bit more to give you a more realistic answer. The other little hardware update is the UWB chip, the ultra-wideband chip. It's now in its second generation, and this opens up the capability of more precision finding, being able to precisely find another Apple device. Now, this only works currently with the Apple Watch Ultra 2 and the Apple Watch Series 9, because that also has the second generation U2. And it just allows you to find those devices more precisely, okay? It gives you like the exact location as opposed to before where you can just like ping the device. But one of the biggest updates are actually the camera. Not the camera hardware, but some of the new software they're incorporating with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. For one, the wide lens, the 48 megapixel wide lens is identical to last year's model. There's no difference there. The ultra wide camera is identical to last year's model. It's still 12 megapixels. The only difference in terms of hardware is the telephoto lens. The previous 14 Pro Max used a 3x telephoto lens. This new version uses a 5x lens. And I have to say, they did a good job with the hardware and computational photography because the shots that I get from the 5x lens actually looks really, really good. Now, obviously, it's not going to beat out a 10x zoom on a Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, but for an iPhone, it's a big jump, and I think for those people that use that telephoto lens, they're going to appreciate the extra 2x. But everyday photos, I'm just not seeing a difference. The photos look almost identical, and it comes down to just white balance changes depending on the moment the photo was shot. That's all you're really going to notice. Now, there is some differences in the way the photo is being created. So for one, the 14 Pro Max using the 48 megapixel lens would use a 12 megapixel photo. With the new 15 Pro Max, it's being done at 24 megapixels. And the one difference that I saw there was sharpness. If you zoom into some of these photos, you can see that there's a lot more sharpness to the photo, and sometimes that increases the contrast ever so slightly. Now, I honestly thought the photos would just be a lot bigger and take up a lot more space, but because it's using a very good codec to process the image, the file size is not that much bigger. Sometimes a megabyte, sometimes 2 megabytes, but it's not not going to tear through your storage space. But the one thing they did improve with the 15 Pro Max is the lens flare. It has been reduced significantly. You're not going to have the crazy lens flare that you got with previous iPhones. It has been toned down on this version, so I'm happy to see that. But for me, the coolest video feature is the ability to finally shoot log on your phone. I know you can do this with other devices, but it's really cool because you can shoot in a very flat profile in ProRes RAW, bring it in to DaVinci Resolve or Final Cut Pro, and add on an Apple log color space. And with that color space, you can tweak it to whatever colors you want the video to look like. It really adds your own personal touch. And it's good because sometimes you'll take a video with your iPhone and it's a bit too HDR-y, and this just lets you get creative. But some of the best updates are actually being done by software. This new software feature of being able to switch to different focal lengths is huge. Now, Apple is marketing this as like carrying 7 Pro lenses in your pocket. Technically, there's no 7 Pro lenses on this phone. There's only 3. What's happening here is you're cropping into certain distances in order to meet a specific focal length. So when you have it on the one-time zoom, it's sitting at 24 millimeters, which is quite wide. If you tap on it again, it pushes up 1.2 times to 28 millimeters. And then if you tap it on one more time, it moves to 35 millimeters or 1.5 times. Now, personally, I'm a big fan of 35 millimeters. I think it takes really good portrait shots, but I think this is gonna take a lot of normal users and make them feel like they're professional photographers. The good news is you can set your preferred focal length by going into the settings and doing it manually, so you don't have to tap it each time. But the one area where I actually saw a difference in terms of photo quality was nighttime photos. There was a little bit more light coming into the sensor, and on top of that, everything just looked a bit sharper, probably because they're shooting each photo at 24 megapixels. In terms of 4K video, it's identical. I'm not noticing a difference there. Even the image stabilization is exactly the same. And these new iPhone 15 Pros and Pro Max are supposed to be using a better gimbal or stabilization process than the previous iPhone. The same holds true if you're using action mode. It looks identical to the previous iPhone. I also want to talk about portrait mode for a second, because if you take a portrait photo, you can switch between subjects. So if your background subject is all blurred and your front is not, you can switch that. And I think that's really cool. It also lets you take a regular photo and add portrait to it. I know some phones have been able to do this already, but it's such a neat feature because there are some photos that I do take that afterwards I think look better with a blurred background. So here's my advice for you. If you're coming from an iPhone 11 or earlier, this iPhone 15 or 15 Pro Max is gonna feel like a massive update for you. If you have an iPhone 12 and you're unsure, my suggestion to you is to consider your battery life. If the battery life on your 12 is just not good anymore, then I'd probably upgrade. But if it's still good and you're happy with the way the phone feels, I'd probably wait for another year. Anyways, that is a little mini review of the iPhone 15 Pro Max. I will be reviewing the iPhone 15 soon, so make sure you drop your questions below for that. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.